In 2005, there was a cultural phenomenon, a moment of monoculture that is inimitable today. Everyone was participating in it, had something to say about it, or at minimum, had feelings about it. It was jokes about Brokeback Mountain. Jay Leno, the most popular late-night show by leaps and bounds, made 15 Brokeback Mountain jokes in 2006.
Did you know I was in the movie?
You're in the movie?
I'm in Brokeback Mountain. I'm a little upset. My scene was cut out. I was in the saloon scene in the dance hall. Show my scene from Brokeback Mountain.
Tina Fey let her dad write a joke about Brokeback Mountain, and it made it to Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update.
The movie Brokeback Mountain opened this week. Yes, the movie is making history as the first Western ever where the good guys get it in the end.
Family Guy made a joke about the horses being traumatized by watching two men have sex.
Hey, the sun's been up for an hour. Shouldn't we get riding?
Are they still sleeping?
Oh, no, I'll check.
What is it?
Oh, my God!
The impact of Brokeback Mountain was so big that Wyoming, where the movie takes place, saw a near 50% rise in tourism in 2006, the year after Brokeback Mountain came out. The movie wasn't even filmed in Wyoming. It was filmed in Canada. There was also the actual movie, the gay cowboy movie, that is not, in fact, about cowboys, but about shepherds. It's an important difference. The two men in Brokeback Mountain, their job is to protect innocent sheep grazing the Wyoming mountains. These are brutally hardy, hardworking, tough men. But cowboy is something they aspire to, and that throughout the movie will be out of their reach. They are literally too poor to be cowboys. Brokeback Mountain is based on a New Yorker short story of the same name by Annie Proulx. It's about Jack, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and Ennis, played by Heath Ledger.
Your folks just stop at Ennis?
Delmar.
Nice to know you, Ennis Delmar.
They meet at 19 years old in 1963, working Brokeback Mountain as shepherds for a vaguely threatening boss for the summer. Jack wants to be a rodeo cowboy, and Ennis just wants to earn a living wage. Jack's a dreamer. Ennis had to quit high school when his family truck died, and they were too poor to replace it, so he couldn't get to school. Jack and Ennis work side by side for the summer, near starving and near freezing, and start to take care of each other, and then they fall in love.
It's nobody's business but ours.
You know I ain't queer.
Me neither.
Their summer ends early because of an oncoming storm. They come down the mountain, and their relationship is over. It can't survive in any other landscape.
Well, I guess I'll see you around, huh?
Okay.
Ennis goes off to marry his sweetheart, Alma, played by Michelle Williams, and Jack goes south to pursue his dream of riding bulls. Riding bulls goes badly, but Jack hooks Lorene, played by Anne Hathaway. Lorene is a daughter of a rich asshole, but Jack starts to be able to afford things like warm coats and a good enough car and gas money to drive back from Texas to Wyoming to visit his old friend Ennis, who he hasn't seen in years.
So me and Jack, we're gonna head out and get ourselves a drink. Yeah.
Sure enough.
Pleased to meet you, ma'am.
We might not get back tonight when we get to drinking and talking and all.
When the two reconnect, they try to just hug, but they can't help themselves and end up passionately kissing. Alma catches sight of it, and it terrifies her. Ennis runs off for a few days with his love, leaving Alma scared with her two daughters back at home. Jack and Ennis start to be able to get away together several times a year, the mountain landscape creating an almost literal buffer from the outside world. But Alma knows, and eventually leaves him for her boss at the grocery store, disgusted by who Ennis is and that he can't financially provide for her properly.
Custody of the two minor children Alma Del Mar Jr. and Jennifer Del Mar is awarded to plaintiff.
And Jack's loneliness during the months and months apart from Ennis get him to start taking more and more risks to find some satisfaction while the two men are apart.
Have you been to Mexico, Jack Twist? Because I hear what they got in Mexico for boys like you.
The two of them desperately are trying to figure out how they can stay in each other's lives and live in the world at the same time. Jack wants he and Ennis to run away together, to start a ranch of their own. But Ennis refuses.
Two guys living together? No way. You know, we can get together once in a while, way the hell out in the middle of nowhere, but...
Once in a while. Every 4 fucking years.
Wait, if you can't fix it, Jack, you got a standard.
Ennis is scared that he and Jack would be strung up if caught. And once Ennis shuts down that dream, Jack starts seeing someone else.
Tell you what, we could have had a good life together. Fucking real good life. Had us a place of our own. But you didn't want it, Ennis. So what we got now is Brokeback Mountain.
Ennis, having not heard from Jack for a while, reaches out to Lorene. Is Jack okay? And he's not. Lorene tells of Jack getting into a car accident.
Jack was pumping up a flat on the truck out on a back road when the tire blew up.
But Ennis thinks he knows the truth. Jack was caught and beaten to death. We never know what really happened, but Ennis is convinced that Jack, at only 40 years old, couldn't outrun being a dreamer who loved love as much as he loved Ennis forever. Ennis wants to know where the body was buried, and Lorene says it wasn't.
He was cremated like he wanted. Half his ashes was interred here. The rest I sent up with his folks. He used to say he wanted his ashes scattered on Brokeback Mountain, but I wasn't sure where that was.
Ennis drives up, trying to convince Jack's parents to give him the ashes so he can honor Jack's wishes. But Jack's dad knows what Jack was and refuses.
I know where Brokeback Mountain is. Thought he was too goddamn special to be buried in the family plot.
Gay men don't get their wishes honored, even when they're dead, the movie seems to be saying. Ennis goes home with nothing but 2 shirts, the shirts that he and Jack wore up on Brokeback that first summer, and Jack had hidden as keepsakes. Ennis goes back to back-breaking labor, estranged relationships with his daughters, an under-furnished trailer, and spends the rest of his days grieving the love of his life, sure that Jack was killed in a hate crime. I love this movie. It is about gay trauma. It is written by a woman, and there were no gay men in leadership positions of making the film. I know all of that. I know all of that. And it's a beautiful movie about poverty, violence, the brutality of the American dream, and 2 boys trying to love each other. It came out in the wake of the brutal murder of Matthew Shepard, which also took place in Wyoming. And so the violence that threatens the young, beautiful men in the film felt palpable as you sat in the theater. Annie Proulx said that her inspiration for the short story was that she was sitting in a bar in her home state of Wyoming and saw an old, grizzled cowboy playing pool. And it occurred to her, you know, I bet some cowboys were gay. A big aha moment for good old Annie. But she said something that I think is kind of sweet, too. When she saw the movie, she said she liked it, but that Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger were too attractive to play Jack and Ennis. She understood that that was the gambit of Hollywood, but she thought that their casting missed the point of the story she was trying to tell. The point to her was that 2 sweet shepherds with bad teeth and bodies nearly broken by hard labor, who must stink from all their work and no running water, found a way to fall in love when the mountains gave them a chance. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered. Hannah, today we're talking about Brokeback Mountain. Do you want to hear my first memory of Brokeback Mountain?
I do want to hear your first memory of Brokeback Mountain.
I went with my family to see the Cameron Crowe film Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise.
Okay.
And there was a preview for Brokeback Mountain. I'm doing this from memory, so maybe I should check my facts, but I'm pretty sure. And in the trailer, you see Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger kiss, and this was a full theater, and people groaned and were like, oh, was what the movie theater in Los Angeles, California did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. That's a very intense experience to have. I feel like that would have made me feel very scared.
It made me feel very sad. And I will say my dad, my very straight dad, made us go opening weekend to this movie. It was like,
oh, you watched it with your dad?
Yes, went to see this movie with my dad and at least one of my brothers.
Huh.
So my dad was so morally offended by people's reaction, and there was a lot of concern that the movie would flop just due to homophobia.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, well, we are voting with our dollars, and took us to see it opening weekend. So that was my first impression of Brokeback Mountain. Yours was last night texting me that it was boring.
I was watching it yesterday. I was so bored. I was texting you and I was like, oh my God, Vanessa, this movie's so slow. Why are there so many shots of mountains?
You and I are very similar. Like, we love very similar things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But this is our difference, which is like the slower a movie is, the happier I am. I love a slow movie. And you were like, you want everything to happen.
My ideal movie is everything everywhere all at once. Like, that is the amount of event I want in my movie. I want to finish a movie and be like, whoa, what just happened?
Me too, but like emotionally.
Yeah, no, I don't want that. I don't want to spend any time with my feelings. No, thank you.
I could watch paint dry. I am never bored. I'm never bored.
I'm bored so easily. But the other reason is that once I do lock in, I am then also like, oh my God, this is so sad.
Yeah,
oh God, I'm gonna die of how sad this is.
I think that this movie made me sad for 3 days. I think I just came out of it today and I watched it 3 days ago.
And its slowness is part of why it is so emotionally effective.
Yes.
So like, it is in no way a critique.
Michael Cunningham, who is the author of The Hours, he loves this movie, and he did an interview with The New Yorker on the 20th anniversary of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said about the characters, when we meet them, they are two 19-year-olds who are going nowhere. And then he pauses and he goes, they're not going nowhere fast. They're going nowhere slow.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the movie, right? The slowness is part of what's so sad. They are alone, and they are alone for long days. And they are eating nothing but beans for long weeks.
Yeah.
You've also watched them. There's a moment toward the end when Anne Hathaway is telling us that Jake Gyllenhaal's character, has died. And she says, and he was only 39 years old. And like, two things simultaneously. You're like, oh my God, we've watched these characters love each other for 20 years. And he was only 39. So this slow pace really is baked into the emotional resonance of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. The slowness for me feels like it also goes hand in hand with how little control they have over their days, their lives, how they spend their time, what that actually looks like, right? That's emphasized so much, particularly in the early hours of the movie. the sense that like they're out here because they need work, and somebody who owns land can tell them exactly how to spend their time and exactly what to do with their bodies. And so much of what shapes their lives are the constraints that come from their powerlessness as a function of being poor.
Yeah.
And that sense that like your days are often very boring when you have so little control over what you do with them.
I really do want to get into what this movie believes about love, but there's one more thing I want to say up top, which is I think that this movie is actually more about what it is like to be part of any sort of quote unquote forbidden love when you are poor than it is about queerness.
Yeah.
I think that it wouldn't be a very different movie if one of them was white and one of them was black, one of them was Jewish and one of them, right? Like, because of the poverty. I think that a lot of this movie has to do with poverty.
Yeah, and I actually think one of the movie's strengths is that it can't divide these things out, right?
Yes.
That it is very interested in the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, class, like the way that these things tangle together, because it is very much about working class masculinity.
Right.
And the violence of working class masculinity and the lack of agency are entangled together. Like, that is one of the film's premises, right? That like violence becomes one of the only ways that Ennis, in particular, Heath Ledger's character, can find autonomy.
Yeah.
But like when he is most caged in by his life is when he lashes out with violence, and the way that that then sort of intersects with the violence that is also at the heart of his internalized homophobia and his fear of actually being with Jack. Like, I think at the end of the day, these identities couldn't be swapped out because it's not about one or the other. It's about their profound entanglement, which actually is what I think this movie believes about love.
Go ahead. What does this movie think about love?
I think that this movie thinks that romantic love is distinct from the functions of marriage, the sort of state apparatus of like marriage, childbearing, inheritance of wealth, accumulation of property. Like, the movie's very interested in intergenerational wealth accumulation and the possibilities of intergenerational wealth accumulation. And we see so vividly that the practical business of getting married, having kids, paying rent, pleasing or failing to please your in-laws, being able to hold down a job, whether or not you can take time off work to go to your daughter's wedding, like all of these things, romantic love is profoundly constrained by them.
Yeah.
But they are not the business of romantic love. The romantic love that we see between these men is distinct from all of the other choices that they are making, which are tied up in the trappings of the traditional love story.
Right. They can't fully engage in the romantic love because of the trappings, but they love each other totally separate than the trappings. I'm trying to parse out what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think conventional love stories as a narrative form, as a genre, entangle these things together, right? They say, when you love somebody, what you do is get married to them and have children and buy a house. Built into the notion of romantic love are a ton of formal, often state-licensed processes that aren't actually about romantic love. They are about social reproduction.
Right.
And often about the accumulation of wealth and the circulation of that wealth across generations.
Right.
And so access to romantic love as it is envisioned within these genres of storytelling, which of course have huge impact on our lives and how we think about how we move through the world, has a lot less to do with the question of like love is love and more to do with the question of, does your love fit into the framework of social reproduction that we actually want romantic love to do?
Right.
And so what I think this movie's arguing about love is that the possibilities of romantic love are profoundly constrained by all of these structures, and that, in fact, they can't be neatly collapsed together, right? A love story is not inherently a marriage story. A love story is not inherently a happy ending.
Yeah.
That is a version of romantic love that is tidally aligned with what the state wants from us. But that the romantic love that we see between these two men is counter to everything the state wants from them.
Thank you. Love. Agreed. I had a similar vibe thought, but different. So I think that this movie believes love is time. If you love something, you love someone, the thing that you want to give it is your time. And there isn't enough time for the people who you love. And that is how you show love, is time. And that how much the structures of the world, money, jobs, parents, health, interfere with your ability to spend time is in direct proportion to what society deems worthy love and unworthy love.
Yeah. And we see them over and over again, you know, so once we're past their initial summer together on Brokeback Mountain, then the only real times we see them together following that are these like weekends that they steal away. Yeah. That they like both leave their families and go back to Brokeback Mountain and spend time together there. And it is so clear that this is them stealing time out of their lives. Yeah. That they are wrenching time away from their jobs, their wives, their children, their other obligations, and that recurring commitment to stealing time for each other is the most profound signal of their love, of like the enduringness of their love, is that they keep doing it. And also create such a material, like a clear material set of constraints. Like they don't have unlimited time because they have all of these other obligations. And a lot of those obligations, they're not things that they could easily leave aside.
Yeah. Hannah, I think that the heart of the movie is exactly about this. I would argue that there's a scene that's the heart of the movie between Ennis and Jack arguing about time, but you have given me permission this week to be in charge of the emergency stop button.
Yeah, I let you put your hand on the cord and everything.
I know you really did. So we're going to have to hit the emergency stop button. So, Hannah, something you might not know about me is that one of my favorite things in the world are Westerns.
I didn't know that about you, but it makes sense considering you like slow movies where nothing happens.
I know. I love just shots of mountains. Well, actually, interestingly, the American Western is almost entirely shot within a 5-mile area in the prairie of the Southwest.
I was going to say, I associate Westerns with prairies, with the sort of like vast, open, unboundaried spaces.
Yes, which is one of the very interesting things if we think about Brokeback Mountain as a Western, is like the difference in setting. Mm-hmm. So I do think, first of all, people talked about this as a Western at the time, mostly as a punchline. People were calling it the gay cowboy movie.
Yeah, they're cowboys, but get this, they're gay.
But even without those jokes, right, Larry McMurtry, who is one of the great Western writers of the 20th century, along with Cormac McCarthy, wrote the screenplay, adapted this from the Annie Proulx short story. This is like designed as a Western in a lot of ways. And I think it's a romantic tragedy, but I think just as much in terms of genre conventions, it's a Western. Mm-hmm. So I am going to be quoting from David Kerr about Westerns as I tell you a little bit about the Western genre.
Okay.
So I'm going to read you a couple of quotes about the Western. Okay, first. At their most profound, Westerns deal with the intersection of the individual and society. You have a sense of what is gained and what is lost in belonging to a community, as opposed to living in the wilderness where he has freedom, the Western hero.
Yeah.
And as I read you these quotes, what I think is so fun is that David Kerr is talking about traditional Westerns made before spaghetti Westerns, right? Like in the first 40 years of Hollywood. And he is talking about law and outlaw. Yeah. But what's interesting is that I think that this works with like below the poverty line and above the poverty line and really with queerness. Yeah. And so we have in Brokeback Mountain the intersection of the individual and society. When these two boys are in the mountains, protected by the mountains, and nobody can see them, they are allowed to be free and in love. And as soon as illness encroaches, as embodied by their boss, Randy Quaid, like comes in, they get caught. And they can't be free together. So this like intersection of the individual and society, I think, is really embodied in these mountains and them being able to camp and be outside of society for this first summer that they fall in love.
And at the same time, again, it's like, it's what is lost when you belong to a community, but it's also what is gained.
Gained, yes.
Because they are crushingly bored and lonely.
And hungry.
They are starving.
Yep.
They are physically uncomfortable all the time. Their work is backbreakingly hard physical labor. And they have a certain kind of autonomy, but it's still an autonomy that is like, oh, it's never a perfect autonomy. It's never.
No.
It's always owned by this other man.
Yeah, they are starving to death. You know, Jack is like, let's just kill one of the sheep. And Ennis is like, we can't kill the sheep. That's what we're here to protect. And he's like, it's 1,000 sheep, you know, and instead they shoot an elk. Like literally they have access to food that they can't eat. Like that is what is lost with this individuality, but they get to be in love. Okay, I'm going to read you another quote. The central irony of the classical Western is that the law has to be established through exactly the kind of personal force, strength, and violence that the law is meant to suppress. So the hero is the perennial outsider who has to use the methods of the outlaw to fight the outlaw.
Okay. This one applies less obviously to me. So tell me how this resonates for you.
Okay, so this is the one where I want to bring the scene to.
Okay.
So the scene that I want to talk about is the scene between Jack and Ennis, where Ennis has just said, I can't do August. And Jack has become wealthy, right? Like he is sitting there, like he has a parka. I think he's kind of made to look like a doofus in this scene. He looks like a fake cowboy. He's in like the Patagonia, like 1960s version of Patagonia, whereas Ennis is like still like in all denim and wool and like hasn't gotten new clothes.
Well, they are no longer in the same class.
They're no longer in the same class
here, right?
Exactly.
Ennis has remained working class. Jack has married into wealth.
Right.
And again, this is like Ennis has held onto his autonomy at the expense of everything else.
Yes.
And Jack has given away part of his autonomy, part of his masculinity is part of what the film is playing out for us in order to have security and
not starve.
Yeah.
He tells us there's a year that he made $3,000 and almost starved.
And he almost starved. Yeah. And that working a rodeo was destroying his body, and he tried to join the military and they wouldn't take him because his body was too destroyed by rodeo. So it's like he has a body to sell. That's what he's got. He just found a way to sell it.
Yeah. So in this scene, Ennis says to Jack, it's because of you that I'm like this. I'm nothing and I'm nowhere. And he's saying it's like only because of you that I'm gay is one of the things that he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
But he has lost his family. He has lost everything and he is nothing and nowhere. And I think that this is the exact thing that makes him able to be alone, right? Like be in this trailer by himself is also the part of him that can't be with Jack. And also is maybe what keeps him alive, right? Jack dies, and we're not sure if it's because of a hate crime or not. And so it's this inner turmoil that keeps him alive, but barely surviving.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this quote. So the central irony is that the law has to be established through exactly the kind of personal force, strength, and violence that the law is meant to suppress. So I'm thinking here about what are the functions of, again, like the state. You know, we've been talking about inheritance, about marriage, about these, you know, legal systems, and the way that ultimately, like at the end of the day, Ennis rejects them again and again, right? He refuses to move into town, even though his wife is so desperate for community. Like, he doesn't want to be brought into any of these systems because these systems, they are there to control him. And ultimately, he is the outlaw, right? Like, he is the outlaw figure in this narrative because he is constantly trying to reject all of the pressures. And that is interesting, I think, in the sense of like queerness as the aberration here that is being constrained by these systems. It's Ennis who rejects and rejects and rejects any kind of being pulled into community, any kind of normalization, sort of on both sides, right? Like, both, he rejects both the heteronormativity and the possibility of queer love.
But that's what I love about Westerns, and I'll read one more quote. It's my favorite thing about Westerns is that the good guys and the bad guys behave exactly the same way. The good guys have badges. And like, that's it. It's like they're using the exact same methods. We have just sort of arbitrarily decided that one side is thugs and one side is heroes. And that is what Westerns are constantly pointing to. And I think that that's what Ennis is, right? It's like, is he the thug or the hero? And it's like he's both. And the movie is ambivalent about that.
Yeah.
Hannah, do you want to read this last quote for us?
Yeah, absolutely. The classical Western is fundamentally concerned with the coming of law that defines a new society. The central irony is that the law has to be established through the personal violence that the law is meant to suppress. The hero is the outsider who has to use the methods of the outlaw to fight the outlaw. He's too much of an outlaw to ever be fully accepted by the townspeople he's been defending, so the hero sacrifices himself for the sake of the law. And he wills his own extinction in the name of civilization. Whew. What's interesting about this is I'm trying, you know, because the Western has this idea of like, these are the terrible things that must be done for the sake of civilization.
And it's often the opening scene of a Western will be a couple trying to get married and the thugs coming and like making it impossible to get married. Right? Like, that is a recurring trope.
Yeah, because civilization is indivisible, again, from heterosexual reproduction, the capture of land, and then its ownership so that that land can be inherited by future generations to create a kind of ongoing financial security, right? This is why the Western is indivisible from sort of colonial project of imagining land as terra nullius, as sort of empty and just available to be taken by men who are brave enough to take it. And so again, it's like, you know, it comes back to the sense of like, what do you have to do in order to fit yourself into the shape of these structures, and who's unwilling to do so. And it's, you know, part of my question of thinking about Brokeback Mountain along the lines of the Western is, what is Ennis actually sacrificing for? Like, who's better off because he sacrifices himself?
He's sacrificing for these weeks away. And that's it, right? Mm-hmm. He says, like, it's because of you. I am nothing and I am nowhere. And it is because of you. It is like just because he loves Jack. And it is for almost nothing, right? It is for like maybe 3 weeks a year, maybe.
Yeah, and that's not the version of civilization that I think the Western is in service of. What is interesting about mapping their love story against the Western, I think, is the way that their love is the outlaw end of things.
Yes, exactly.
It is, in the case of Jack, it's him literally doing things that are probably illegal. Like, I think probably going to Mexico and hiring a sex worker is probably literally against the law.
Well, sodomy was illegal in most states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we keep talking about them as like stealing time, right? That they're outlaws from their own lives, stealing time away, and that those are hypothetically like the release valves that let them keep participating in day-to-day society, which reminds us that like the quote-unquote natural state of things, heterosexual marriage, biological reproduction, inheritance of wealth and land, right? That's the civilization. And that is not only profoundly not natural, but is also built on a platform of violence. And that there are lots of forms of violence that takes. And the movie shows us those forms of violence in all kinds of ways, right? It shows us the violence of what working class men have to do to their bodies, like the way they have to sell their labor. It shows us the violence of, the killing that they have to do, the way that they have to interact with animals, the sort of blood and mess and viscera of their day-to-day lives, and the violence of like just the fights, right?
Yeah.
And the ultimate violence, which is the ruthless 20-year crushing of their own souls.
Yes. Thus can end my section on the Westerns. The last thing I'll say about them is that Westerns have had the outlaw be the hero and have been indicting the audience for at least 50 or 60 years, where like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid are 100% the bad guys. They are bank thieves. They are not robbing from the rich to give to the poor. HUD, Paul Newman is deconstructing this in the 60s. Like, and you in the audience are like, oh, I find you hot and I'm rooting for you. And you are rooting for the bad guy. So I do think that there's this idea of earlier Westerns as being this like pro-pioneering, pro-expansionist point of view. And that's always there. But I also really do think that good Westerns for at least 50 years have been really complicating that of like, who is actually on the side of good, who's the disruptor, etc.
Yeah. And that's kind of like written into the DNA of the genre in some ways, is that it is always grappling with the violence at the heart of the building of civilization.
Exactly. It's like, okay, we need someone to defend this bride on her wedding day. We don't want her getting robbed and shot on her wedding day. But is the cop better?
Well, yeah. And what is interesting about this film is that it says, what if the peaceful continuity of heteronormative life is itself the violence? If that is the harm.
Exactly. Thank you for letting me do the emergency stop. Whew.
How'd it feel?
I hated it. I'm just so passionate about this topic. I just am so passionate about this topic. I want to write a book about Westerns at some point. I love them. Okay, what is the subtext of this movie, Hannah?
Oh, okay. The subtext, particularly trying to think about like what might be a little bit more clear to us from a 20-year distance, is that queer love is best portrayed by and through the lens of straight men.
Yeah.
Who are able to humanize and render sympathetic homosexuality because they themselves are not gay.
Yes.
So Ang Lee, Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal, right? These like two straight white cis male heartthrobs and a very well-respected auteur style straight male filmmaker combining their powers to say, we think that gay love is worth looking at, and you can trust us on that because none of us have a horse in this race.
Yeah.
Right? And that idea of like, you can more effectively humanize when you are not speaking from the perspective of the dehumanized. which I think conversations that have happened in the past 20 years have really complicated that and complicated, the practice of casting straight men to play gay men, and complicated the question of like, not only what stories are we telling, but who's getting to tell those stories, and what do we sacrifice in the interest of making ourselves more stomachable to the people who hate us. At the end of the day, does that accomplish anything? Trying to sort of trying to sell our right to humanity. Does that actually work? Maybe that's a question too big for a podcast episode. But thinking about sort of what is the star power of these two men at the time, and how central is that, like their star power and their strong alignment with heterosexuality, their public heterosexuality, the fact that Heath Ledger married Michelle Williams after making this movie, right? Like the way that their straightness counteracts the threat of the on-screen gayness. That's the subtext that I wanted to pull out.
Ang Lee was also at the straightest he'd ever been, right? He had just done The Hulk. I think Ang Lee had done The Wedding Banquet and Sense and Sensibility. I think that he had done movies that we would consider like femme or effete, right? But he had just done The Hulk. And it was sort of because of The Hulk that he was able to pick a darling as his next project because of the financial success of The Hulk. So like, that really matters. And, watching old interviews of Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger at the time, it is so interesting to watch them just really do this, this love is love talk of like very coolly being like, I didn't even think about it. Like, I'm an actor. It'd be the same as me kissing a woman. Like, there were just like these sound bites that they were giving that was, this is just like a straight love story. They just happen to be gay.
It's so interesting because the love is love discourse is so there in how the movie's circulated.
Yeah.
In the interviews that they gave, in the way that reviewers spoke about the movie at the time. But I don't think it's there in the film.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, with the subtext that I have, I was like, I don't know if this is subtext, though. I think you were so wise, Hannah, to pick like a meta thing about the movie for subtext because, right, like the movie is so slow, it's so spare. I mean, like, Heath Ledger barely opens his mouth when he talks. Like, there's just like so nothing that like the whole movie is subtext. So the thing I'm about to say, I'm like, it's not literally text, but I do think the movie knows it's saying this, which is just, there is always a threat of violence, even between the two of them when they are saying goodbye. No matter how loving they are, there is always a threat of violence. Randy Quaid has binoculars and can see them. They can be in the middle of flippin' mountains with nothing but sheep, and it is scary. But I don't think that that's subtext. That kind of gets stated also. The one thing I'll say, there are two big differences between the short story and the movie. One is that the women have much bigger roles in the movie than they do in the short story. And the other is the moment after Jack and Ennis originally separate, after their first summer at Brokeback, Jack drives off and we follow Ennis walking. And we get that very quintessential Western shot of him being like a lone guy in his denim walking away. And in the story, Ennis throws up in so much pain at the idea of being separated from his one true love. And in the movie, he punches a wall. And he punches the wall so much and so violently that even though they patted the wall, Heath Ledger bloodied his hand.
He also throws up.
Yes, but it is not like an act of violence in the short story, right? Like, he's just physically ill. And this, like, it's not just violence out in the world. It's like you can be alone in a barn and you are going to be violent on yourself. There's just violence everywhere.
I agree. It's very tricky to pull out that kind of subtext from this movie because this is a movie that is like, oops, all subtext.
Yeah.
But it is certainly constantly working to remind us of the possibility of violence simmering under the surface of every interaction, which is, I suspect, part of what made it resonate so much with women viewers, because like it was really, really popular with women viewers. And I think it's much more frank about the sort of possibility of violence hovering under the surface of interactions with men than straight romance generally is willing to be.
Yes. And I mean, the other thing that we just would be remiss if we did an episode about Brokeback Mountain without saying the name Matthew Shepard. This is like starting to get adapted right after and is released 5 years after Matthew Shepard, who was gay in Wyoming, got tied to a stile and beaten to death for being gay. So this is a time where that conversation is very active.
This, for me, segues into what really stood out for me, like what this film really adds to our conversation about queer love, because I feel like a lot of queer romance struggles with, and we've talked about this, struggles with a coming out of the closet narrative in which everybody is happy for the person who's coming out of the closet.
Yeah.
Because you want a rom-com to have happy endings. And also it undermines the real reasoning underpinning that fear. It sometimes suggests that the fear is just in your head.
Yeah.
And what this movie does is center that fear and make that fear make perfect sense by showing us, one, the act of profound homophobic violence that shaped Ennis's youth and that continues to haunt him, which we can talk about. But two, also showing how that threat of violence is repeatedly reinforced through interactions with men and women, right? Like the threat of violence is there from the beginning and nothing happens to abate it because it's also there at the end in the question of how Jack dies.
Yeah. So it's so interesting. So Ennis tells the story to Jack about why they can't be together, right? So Jack is saying to him, my wife's dad would bribe me to leave, lets you and I put a down payment on a place and go start a ranch together. And Ennis says, we can't do that. We got to just bear this. First of all, we have responsibilities. But second of all, we can't do that. And the story is, when I was little, when I was 8 or 9 years old, my dad took me to see a man who had been strung by his penis and dragged to his death. And the key things are, this man lived as a rancher with another man. They were tough old birds. It wasn't explicit. They were lovers. They were like badass ranchers. And one day they were strung up. And for all I know, it was my daddy who did it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's unclear, what is interesting to me, this man took both of his sons, and you're kind of not sure if it was, I'm worried that you're a little gay, so I'm going to take you to see this, or if it's just like, I'm proud, or like you don't know the context in which this father takes these two boys to see a man dragged. But it is its own act of violence, right? That he has taken his kids to see this.
And I think that we're shown other examples of the socialization of boys that encourage us to put this on a continuum of how boys are taught to be men.
Yeah.
You know, the scene that I would place that next to is the scene where Jack is fighting his horrible father-in-law over whether or not the TV will be on during Thanksgiving dinner. And the father-in-law says, like, boys should watch football.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just this little line, but it's this reminder that, like, whether or not you suspect your son might be a bit queer, part of the business of making him into a man is exposing him to violence.
Yeah.
That violence is part of the formation of this kind of hegemonic masculinity that has violence deeply embedded in it. And that might take the form of violence towards your child, and it might take the form of exposing your child to the violence between other men. It might take the form of showing your child the violence that is done to bodies that are not performing their masculinity correctly. But all of those are part of sort of a continuum of how masculinity is created.
And the only way that Jack wins that fight against his father-in-law is with the threat of violence.
Absolutely.
He's like, we're turning off the TV for this lovely reason. He's like, this child's mom spent time cooking this meal. He will not be distracted while eating it. But he's like, or I will kill you, to his father-in-law. And there's a shot of Anne Hathaway being really proud of her husband for threatening to kill her father. And is like, I married a man.
Yeah. Yeah. And because her father has treated her like shit. And again, to go back to that Western trope, right? It's like the behavior of the criminal and the behavior of the cop are identical behavior. And the possibility of the perfect Thanksgiving family meal, it can only be made a pleasant meal through the threat of violence. And that threat of violence very clearly makes her feel taken care of.
Yeah.
Like, and satisfied that, like, somebody stood up for her.
Yeah. The most threatening person in the room is on her side.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
Like, that's it.
And protecting her honor in some kind of way.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, we've talked so much about this idea that love makes you brave, right? That's been a through line in so many of the movies that we've watched. And I think it's really important that in this movie, it's like love is making them as brave as it can, but the violence of homophobia, no matter how brave they are, makes their love unlivable.
Yeah.
They can't brave their way through this.
No. And the opinion that Ennis has that does not change is this is life or death. Us being together is a life or death choice.
Yeah.
Woo!
All right, Vanessa. Well, on that topic, complete the sentence. You should watch this movie if...
I'd say you have to be feeling emotionally resilient to watch this movie. If you're like teetering, this isn't the movie to watch.
Not for the teetering.
It's not for the teetering. What about you, Hannah? You should watch this movie if...
you want to feel sad while looking at mountains, which is an activity I do almost every day.
Well, mountains obviously are a place where you can hide your queerness, and prairies, everything is out in the open. So you have to be super straight. So if you want to feel sad and gay while looking at mountains.
And again, I do that every day.
So I feel a lot of anxiety about women writing gay male love stories. I feel particular anxiety about women writing gay male love tragedies, which is what Brokeback Mountain is. Brokeback Mountain is a short story that I adore and a film that I love. And yet Annie Proulx is, as far as I can tell, a straight lady. And this was like an imaginative exercise for her. And that just puts my teeth on edge. But me going, doesn't feel like an entirely articulated thought. And so I thought I would get an expert on the phone to help me articulate the complications of that. That expert is Guy Mark Foster. Dr. Foster is a professor of African American literature and sexuality studies at Bowdoin College. He's the author of the article, What to Do If Your Inner Tomboy is a Homo: Straight Women, Bisexuality, and Pleasure in M/M Gay Romance Fictions. Hi, Guy. Thank you so much for getting on the phone with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So this is a topic that I have been fascinated with and obsessed with for years. Why are all these straight women writing gay love stories like A Little Life and Brokeback Mountain? And I don't quite know how I'm supposed to feel about it. And I know there's a lot of discourse on the topic. So I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about what some of those concerns are about. What I can't even articulate why I'm worried. So tell me why I'm worried.
Sure. One of the things that we have this sort of notion that cross-identification is somewhat problematic, especially from dominant groups to minority groups. I think there's a sense of appropriating other people's experiences for your own benefit. Certainly one of the complaints or critiques that I write about in my essay that some gay male readers feel as if women, broadly speaking, are encroaching on their territory, doing so badly.
That is the thing, right? It's like if you do it well, no one is that mad.
Yeah, so there's a sense that women are able to get attention for their narratives in ways that gay men are not able to get attention. And so these narratives that women put out seem to be gobbling up territory and gobbling up awards or gobbling up eyeballs, the way that books written by gay men in particular are not taken up. And so there's a sense of again, misappropriation of these texts, of these stories, but also of misrepresenting the lives that they're writing about in their novels. Often in M/M romance novels, homophobia, for example, seems to be played down.
Oh, interesting.
Almost bracketed out, almost, not exclusively. Again, Brokeback Mountain is not really an M/M romance, but in the genre, in particular, the romance genre, homophobia seems to be outside the area of interest for many of these writers. They're interested in the insular nature of that intimate relationship. And the outside world plays a role, but not a role that's designed to derail or challenge the primary couple in the relationship. So gay male readers feel as if those narratives are unrealistic, but there's a kind of violence that gay men experience that straight women who write these narratives don't experience. And they seem to be getting, straight women in particular, they seem to be getting the lion's share of attention for narratives that misrepresent these men's lives and sort of sanitize them in a way that falsely represents the lived experience of gay men, of gay male characters.
I think that is one of my concerns. You know, I've studied very lightly, like some philosophy of empathy and the idea that like empathy is a form of erasure. That if I'm saying, oh, Guy was rude to me today, but I don't know, maybe someone was mean to him at the bank earlier. It's very compassionate. It's lovely that I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but actually I'm making up a story about you. And I think that is what I feel when I'm reading straight women writing about gay men. I'm like, maybe that is what they're feeling, but maybe you're totally erasing what's really happening. And because of publishing being a limited pie, you have a very loud megaphone as you are spreading misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I again, that concern, that complaint is legitimate, but the notion of empathy that you mentioned, I think isn't something that we should sideline too easily.
Yeah.
Because cross-identification, for straight women to identify with the gay male experience does seem to create the opportunity or the possibility for a kind of shared understanding of humanity in some ways. And so I think the straight women, primarily the straight women, and again, straight is a complicated term.
Of course.
I don't want to sort of say that all the women who write these novels are straight in a rigid sense. Some of these women are exploring their gender identities and their sexualities, even while they're heterosexually married and they have children. But some of them do identify very firmly as straight.
Yeah.
But the empathetic component is something that's, I think, useful. Gay men need allies.
Yeah.
And straight women can be allies because they raise children. You know, they are married to straight men, some of them, or they date straight men. And so they have a role in educating or getting their male sons and husbands and boyfriends to think more empathetically about this population.
Yeah.
In fact, some male partners of heterosexual women find themselves reading these books because they're lying around the house and they pick these books up. And they are surprised in some interviews I've read that they find the books enlightening and entertaining.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way in helping to create a larger world environment, I think, in the US especially, where the homophobia that we have experienced in decades past and still experience in many ways today is somewhat lessened or at least finessed somewhat. And so I want to sort of see the pluses and the minuses of this type of cross-identification and not altogether throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Totally. No, that's the tension of empathy, right? Is like we want our circle of care to be as creative and as expansive as possible. And then you're like, but I want to do that while honoring what's really going on with the person. But also, time is limited. I'm not going to get to know every single person who I interact with in a day, right? Like,
Exactly.
And so do you feel differently about when women write gay romance versus gay tragedy? Do you see a distinction there? Because I do think it's gay tragedy that trips me up more.
That's a good question, distinction between gay romance and gay tragedy. I think they serve different purposes. I think the gay tragedy and the popularity of that film in particular, Brokeback Mountain, it may have been instrumental in ushering in some really important changes to the lives of gay men in particular in terms of marriage equality, sort of sensitizing a dominant public to the challenges that gay men face in different environments.
Yeah.
There's a danger, I think, in the proliferation of gay tragic narratives because it sends the message that gay life is tragic.
Right.
And I think you want to caution against too many of those types of narratives. And same way with narratives about Black people, that the killing of Michael Brown and all these Black men who were killed, it becomes sort of, there's an expression people use, tragedy porn.
Yeah.
And many Black identified people get frustrated with the proliferation of those stories and those images on their phones, on their TV screens. And so those types of tragic stories just lends the message that that's all there is to being Black,
Right.
just as all there is to being gay is being gay bashed.
Right.
So romance is an antidote to that in some ways. And in some ways it's useful that homophobia is kept to the margins of some of those narratives. So again, there are positives and negatives about these types of narratives. And I do see a clear distinction between the gay tragic narratives and the gay romance narratives written by straight women.
So if you were just going to tell me what your article is about, how would you articulate the central argument?
Yeah, what I was trying to argue in the paper that straight women writers and readers of romance, that they are modeling for all of us a more complex relationship to our identities and our sexualities than we're often allowed to live out in the real life, because these novels are about fantasy, and fantasy is this site of expansiveness. There's no price to pay for fantasizing in the way that there would be a price to pay for living out what you fantasize. And so it creates psychic space, psychic room, psychic elbow room for readers and writers to engage with parts of their identities that they've had to let go. They've had to grieve. Because again, Freud talks about bisexuality. Everyone is psychically bisexual, but no one is actually physically bisexual, or it's difficult to be so.
And can you just define for me bisexuality in the way that you're using it?
Sure. It's a complex term because people do often reduce bisexuality to object choice, being a person who's attracted both to men and to women. That is part of it. That's part of the definition, because in Freudian pre-Oedipal stages, the little boy is erotically attracted to or drawn to both the mother and the father. In other words, he's drawn both to a male body and a female body. That's a modeling of our contemporary understanding of bisexuality. But for Freud, masculinity and femininity are interior sort of psychic states as well, that our internal self isn't rigidly fixed in a gendered sense. We are both men and women. I think James Baldwin said it really well, is that we are all androgynous. We all contain the other within inside of us. We are contain the man and the woman within us. We find that very inconvenient, he says, but that seems to be the truth. We're not these rigidly drawn manly and womanly characters, our psyches are much more complicated, and they have feminine components and masculine components. And that's the other components of bisexuality. For Freud, he suggests, again, we give up the outwardly bisexual nature. We give it up, and we suppress the internal one as well. Mm-hmm. We suppress it because our culture it can't fully accommodate. We live in a very binary world, either or.
Yeah.
Men have to be masculine, women have to be feminine, and those erotic attachments, homosexuality and homosexuality, they aren't allowed to live together as you mature. So these romance novels, they do model for us a possible future in which we don't have to give up these lost loves. Judith Butler calls them lost loves that we have to give up in order to be proper men and proper women. So that's why these novels I find written by straight women are fascinating, because they seem to be, even without thinking about it in an explicit way, some of these writers seem to be gesturing towards identities that they feel deeply embedded in them, but that they aren't fully allowed to express openly.
Yeah, it's an imaginative play space where we can imagine a better world.
I like that, imaginative play space. It's an imaginative play space. The woman that I use, Karen Thomas, she's the one who wrote this first short story about the pizza man having sex with someone else. And she talks about her early tomboy identity.
Yeah.
And she feels that she's a gay man trapped in a woman's body. That kind of narrative. Those narratives are somewhat problematic when you think about transgendered narratives. But at the same time, these writers are trying to give voice to a kind of complex subjectivity that they don't have any other language for. So they use the language of transgender identity, having someone else trapped in your body, and they use their literary works, either as readers or as writers, to engage with, grapple with, play with this sort of complex, more nuanced identity that, again, if they were to announce it to the world, to their neighbors, people would sort of shun them, maybe.
Yeah. I feel really invited by that. I teach a class on training chaplains to do spiritual care for non-religious folks. And the lesson is, if you are getting better at loving the person, then you are like doing chaplaincy. And so it's really like, this kind of reading by its fruits. It gets really complicated on the publishing end, but I've talked about this before on the podcast. I remember the first time I saw the trailer for Brokeback Mountain, and when, Jake Gyllenhaal and Heath Ledger kissed, the whole theater booed. And I think just like that was the first time a lot of people in that theater saw two men kiss. And I don't think that same group of people would boo now, right? Even if they never saw the movie, I think that exposure made them more compassionate. Besides the fact that I love the story and I love the movie, if you know it by its fruits, I do think also it just ended up being I'm glad it's in the world.
Me too. I sat through that film back to back. I saw it twice in a row when it came out. I was stunned by that film, even though it wasn't, I think, made for me.
No, it was made for me.
But I felt that movie was doing a lot of work. It was clearing space.
Yeah, it's like clearing brush.
Yeah, it was an opportunity for people to be better. And some people became better, just as Will and Grace made people better.
Yeah.
Even with comedic register, and people have problem with that TV show as well.
Yeah.
But I think elbow room, or clearing brush, as you put it, some texts, that's their reason for being. It's not simply positive or not simply negative. It's a combination of things. But I guess that's okay.
Yeah. Guy, thank you so much for your scholarship and for your time. And also just as a romance reader, for your really compassionate academic lens toward the genre of romance. I don't feel like that is something that a lot of academics offer romance readers. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I also wrote an essay on interracial romances, Black women and white men, years ago. And I was floored by the genre when I found it. So I just find this genre of writing romance a very, very fruitful area.
When we get to do the movie Something New, we will have you back on. Yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that film quite well. So you guys are terrific. I appreciate you inviting me on. And I appreciate your time and your questions and your interest.
You're lovely. You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are a small show, so we need your support to run. If you can, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. If you love the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We are a Not Sorry production. I'm the executive producer along with my co-EP, Ariana Nettleman. We are edited and produced by the same Ariana Nettleman, and we are distributed by Acast. Thanks as always to our soulmate level patrons, Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for, Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp, Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for, Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with, Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class, Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, but crazy in love with, Leia Goldberg, who we would carry on our backs as we jump from tree to tree like a spider monkey, Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to, Russell Tongue, whose wedding we would yell, "I object" at, Emma Greenlee, who we would choreograph a cheer for, and Lauren Gordon, who we would ride the Ferris wheel for over and over again. And thanks to our team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, and Stephanie Paulsell. And special thanks to Guy Foster for joining us as the expert on this film.